Hello, and thank you for joining us today for our webcast on avoiding AI failure, why CEOs must master data now, with Tim Kreytak and Paul Hardy of Ironside Group. Today's session is the final installment of our AI series, assembled with thought leaders in our community, and we're happy to have you with us. CEO Coaching International coaches thousands of CEOs and their leadership teams around the world in over 80 countries worldwide. During the presentation, note that you're in chat-only mode. Please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A box. And now it is with great pleasure to introduce and hand things over to John Harmeling, Chief Revenue Officer of CEO Coaching International.
Hello and welcome to our webcast today. My name is John Harmeling, and we at CEO Coaching International have partnered with thousands of CEOs and entrepreneurs all around the world to help them take their businesses to the next level. We love changing the trajectory of our clients' businesses, and one of the things we chart the closest is the results our clients see. Clients that are with CEO Coaching International for 2 years or more experience 2.6 times greater revenue growth and 5 times the EBITDA growth against the US average. And there's good reason why these results happen. Our CEO coaches are all ex-CEOs who have been in your shoes and have faced many of the same problems you're facing today. Now, one critical business problem our clients are facing is how to handle the threat and the opportunity of AI. Our clients have told us that they rate the importance of having an AI strategy as critically important, but they frequently tell us that their readiness, their actual AI strategies, are still immature. So for some time now, we've been working to keep you on top of it by bringing you the very best thinking, the very best experts to bring you up to speed, to get you ahead on this very fast evolving AI landscape. And one of the ways we've been doing this is through this series of webcasts, which have seen hundreds of CEOs in our community learn practical insights from experts on this game-changing technology. If you haven't been able to make all these webcasts, we invite you to go back to ceocoaching.ai to check out the replays. And if you're interested in learning more or speaking on a complimentary basis with one of our coaches, feel free to use the link in the chat to book time with us. We're obviously always delighted to help. Also, if you have questions to pose to our speakers today, please feel free to submit them through the question box, and we'll do our best to get to them over the course of the discussion. Now, speaking of today, for the next few minutes, we're going to talk about AI with a focus on what a CEO needs to know about data as it relates to AI. We're talking to the leaders at Ironside, a leading data analytics firm and one of our strategic partners at CEO Coaching. And we're going to go deeper on what it takes to get started in leveraging these amazing capabilities and how to avoid the pitfalls that other businesses encounter when they're thinking about their AI strategy, especially as it relates to data. So now I'll introduce you to our two guests for today's webcast. Tim Kreytak, he's the CEO and co-founder of Ironside. He's led Ironside from its inception. He's helped it become a leader in the North American analytics community. Ironside has been honored on the Inc. 5000 for multiple years. Also, importantly, Ironside has 10 plus years in the CEO Coaching International community and has also been a client of CEO Coaching as well. And Paul Hardy is the Executive Vice President of Professional Services at Ironside. He brings over 25 years of consulting and P&L experience. He's been selling and delivering transformation services encompassing strategy, people, process, partnerships, and technology to clients of all sizes across multiple industries. So welcome, Tim and Paul.
Thank you, John. Happy to be here.
Yes, thank you, John.
So Tim, maybe can we start with you by just telling us a little bit more about what you do at Ironside?
Yeah, no question, John. Thanks so much, and I appreciate the time and having us here to discuss what is a really important topic. Ironside is a data analytics and AI consulting firm. So what that means is that we assist in helping our customers turn data into information, ultimately to make decisions. We've been doing that leveraging databases and reporting and descriptive analytics. We have 5 practices. We've actually been implementing machine learning AI for 8 or 9 years and have, like I said, have a dedicated team of folks focused on data science. As John mentioned, data, organizing data, combining data, cleaning data, and bringing external data in are all examples of projects that we've done and things that we think are very important to leverage your data to make better decisions and improve your business.
Terrific. So really well qualified to talk about the topic for today. Let's start maybe with you, Paul, with a pretty fundamental question. And I'll reference what Peter Diamandis said at our Make Big Happen Summit. He said that there would be two types of companies at the end of this decade: those who have embraced AI in their business and those who are no longer in business.
Yes.
Are you buying the hype around AI?
Yeah, that's a great quote from Peter, by the way. He was terrific at the CEOCI Summit, so really enjoyed listening to him there. And yes, I think one of the messages we need to convey to the CEOCI community and CEOs in general is that believe the hype. Why is that? Generative AI, the type of AI that has recently created so much excitement, has the fastest rate of enterprise adoption of any technology in history. So it's out there. It is being used. People are exploring it, right? And it's important that you understand that there's still, it's only 2 years old, generative AI, but there are still billions of dollars being poured into it to increase the level of innovation. So it's not just that it's interesting now, it's going to continue to get more and more powerful over time. So our belief is that you have to adopt AI not only immediately, but think of it as a journey. Because I think the winners in AI are really going to be those that look at AI as a journey and as a cultural change, right? Because even what you think of now and think that perhaps it's intimidating, it is only going to continue to change. So, so we believe what Peter is saying. With respect to skepticism, there's not a lot to be skeptical about, except that there are some cautionary tales out there. One is that generative AI in particular, I think we'll talk about the different types of AI, despite hearing all the hype, it's not a panacea. And that's because we'll talk about different types of AI that are used in the enterprise today. And you should just be aware that, although this may not be a welcome message, even if you're adopting generative AI, you're not tapping into what all of those competitors might be doing with AI. So it's a good thing if you're doing it, but it is not the be all end all of AI. Hopefully it's putting you on a journey.
Yeah, it's terrific. It makes me think about something we've heard over and over again as a question from attendees of these webcasts, but also from clients generally. And given these vast capabilities that you're describing, applying those capabilities is obviously an imperative. And the question that we keep getting is it more important to start with the business problem and then see where AI can help? Or do you start with these capabilities that you're describing that AI can provide and see what kind of problem you can solve with them?
Boy, that is a great question. And our belief, and it is borne out over time, is that you must focus on what we call use cases first. The thing to really understand about AI, it is not a technology solution, it's a business solution, right? In fact, you can waste a lot of effort, therefore money and time, if you're not focused on specific use cases that can be productive in your business. Those use cases, we personally keep a catalog of many types of these use cases that could be used in any organization, but every organization is going to have its own unique use cases. And in fact, you should focus on finding those because that's where your special sauce is, and we can talk more about that. But it's definitely a business solution, not a technology solution. And you need to focus on use cases that work best for your organization, whether that's using machine learning or whether it's using generative AI.
Good stuff. We'll definitely talk about use cases in just a bit. You mentioned the two types of AI, and you also, Tim, you were kind of introducing Ironside, and you were talking about how Ironside's been working in machine learning for a long time. Can you lay out the differences between generative AI that, Paul, you were just referencing this advent and all the technology and the adoption, everything like that? Can you lay out the differences between generative AI and machine learning, especially through the lens of what a CEO needs to know?
Yeah, John, and thanks for asking that question, because it is important that CEOs know there is a difference. And I say that because there'll be so much hype around generative AI that, again, you might think, oh, I'm doing something with generative AI, whether I'm personally playing with ChatGPT or using an application in my business, and therefore I'm on top of AI. That is not the case. It's a great question. So let me lay this out at a CEO level. There are two types of enterprise AI today that are relevant. Okay, The first is called machine learning. You've heard us mention that. That's been around for a long time. That's why we've had a practice in it for 8 years. The second and the more hyped one at this point in time is generative AI. It came out in really October, November of 2022, and has, I said, been adopted faster than anything in history. So let's talk about machine learning. Machine learning, what's important to understand is that it looks at and plays with and ingests your structured data. What does that mean? You have lots of systems in your business. You know all the acronyms: ERP, CRM, learning management system, LMS, HRIS. All of those systems you can assume have underneath them some kind of database. Okay. What machine learning does is it takes in all of that data that we call structured data. It looks at historical patterns in that data to produce what I call blinding insights. Okay, so think of it as structured data with a superpower of blinding insights. What does that mean? I'll use an example in a moment. We'll talk about customer churn. Generative AI, on the other hand, its new younger brother, took actually machine learning and applied it in a very special way. And what it was able to do was basically read the internet, believe it or not, from end to end, and develop associations between words and concepts in all of that textual language. And it can do the same thing in your enterprise, right? So think of it as consuming not that structured data, but consuming textual data. So what might that be in your organization? It might be your customer service logs. It might be your HR manuals. It might be your product descriptions, right? So it can ingest that information and make relationships between words and concepts and that information so that it is searchable, queryable, if you will, and also it can be used to write a pretty decent description in natural language, right? So its superpower from those capabilities is productivity. There's personal productivity where you're able to use the tool to both query and write things, and there's process productivity for your enterprise. Where does that come from? Well, again, now you can repurpose people to do different things because that tool can handle things like internal queries in an intranet or external queries in customer service or things of that nature, right? So that's where we're seeing it applied today. So think of machine learning, structured data, particularly integrated structured data across multiple systems, producing blinding insights. Generative AI ingesting textual data, or what we call unstructured data, and producing personal or process productivity. Hopefully that makes sense.
So are you seeing any trends on where companies are leaning in more? Because you said, okay, we've got the adoption on generative AI, but we've got sort of the run rate of machine learning. Is there one area that is seeing greater investment than the other right now?
Oh, certainly generative AI is seeing more investment, and that's unfortunately a bit of a shame, because let me go back to these blinding insights in the example. And I will say both types are great. You should be looking to use both. Don't get caught up in the idea that you're using generative AI and therefore you have all the answers. And this example should paint the picture for you. Customer churn. Let's say you want to understand, why are my customers churning? You could use ChatGPT and you could ask that question and it would provide answers for you. You could even specify what business you're in, what industry you're in, how long you might have been in business, and it will produce a set of answers why your customers might be churning. That is decent information for you and your executives to think about. So please feel free to go ahead and do that. On the other hand, in your business, you have all of the history related to your customers, their transactions, what training they have taken, what customer service calls they have required. How often do they purchase? What time of year do they purchase? What's the seasonality in the business? What SKUs do they purchase? In what combinations? Where do they have the biggest problems, right? What kind of relationship do they have with our sales force? All of those things, that's data that's in your systems. And guess what? It is not, thankfully, out on the internet in a large language model somewhere. So if you want to understand why your customers churn, you can exercise machine learning on all of that internal data that only you have, and it will tell you exactly which of those factors are contributing to customer churn and in what rate, right? And then you can act on that information proactively in customer service or in many other ways. ChatGPT, even if you were to provide it some kind of data, the only way you can answer that question the same way, provide a score for each of your customers as to when they might churn, and is if you were to write it up in language and enter that into your LLM, well, into your generative AI application, right? So hopefully you see the big difference, right? You can generically ask questions about it, about generative AI, about customer churn to get information, but machine learning is about your personal data, your transactions. It can give you very precise outcomes and insights. So because that sounds, that machine learning example sounds a bit more complex, it is, right? Your business is complex, you have lots of complex systems, so that requires some work, right? Generative AI, as I said, you can go right now to ChatGPT and tell them your industry and ask why my customers might be churning. Helpful, but not the same level of insight. So a lot more attention being paid today to generative AI because it is so simple to execute on, but it doesn't do the same thing or act on the same data.
Very clear, thank you. So you mentioned HR manuals and blogs and customer service and customer data. So there are multiple parts of our clients' businesses where AI can be applied. What areas are you seeing? Marketing, customer service, HR. What areas are you seeing the greatest application of AI, and what functional areas of businesses?
Yeah, as I say, machine learning has been really in use. The math is about 20 years old, and with increases in compute and storage power, it's been deployed, say, for about 8 years, as long as we've had a practice. Generative AI, on the other hand, as I said, is new. So what's being done today, I'll talk about generative AI then and how it's being deployed today. Generically, think of generative AI as creating what we call knowledge bases. You take that textual, unstructured data, you feed it into generative AI, and you can now query it, and it can write responses based on those queries that handle, the English language very well as other languages. So the kind of applications we are seeing are what we call knowledge bases, or now sometimes called AI assistants, and that's being done first internally. Typically, a client will do it internally in order to manage the risk and get to understand it. So it's things like HR catalogs, it's product catalogs, things that are queryable by employees, right? Then it expands to being customer facing once the level of trust is there. That tends to be in things like customer service, right, and chatbots. So connecting, a type of generative AI that writes a chatbot or even speaks in an online system with the generative AI models that search your own data to produce the right answers to the questions that are being asked. And there are things you might have heard of called hallucinations and things that generative AI sometimes produce as a risk. So you have to be careful, and companies that we see them are adopting first internal knowledge bases and then expanding that to customer-facing knowledge bases. I will tell you the most interesting, if anyone is interested in this, to me, the most interesting application of generative AI that we're currently talking to a client about is what's called a virtual focus group. So imagine that you're taking in all of your product data, but you're also scraping all of the data off of your paid advertising sources, i.e. your social media web presences and that sort of thing. And you're incorporating that into personas that are like your customer base. And now you can query that customer base and get essentially a virtual focus group feedback without having to conduct actual focus groups on a period. Not that you shouldn't do that as well, but you're actually getting updated information off of social media, off of purchasing sites and things of that nature, as well as information about your clients that you have in your internal system. So that to us has been one of the most interesting cases that customers hypothesized with us, and we're anxiously working on that. So
that is super interesting. So you're saying in that particular application, I would essentially build 10 different personas where ordinarily I would have shown up at some office in the middle of some city, and I would have listened to them talk about these different perspectives they have based on their life experience, and you can actually get that customer data based on the personas. That's fascinating.
Yeah, and really, what's really fascinating about it too is now, say next month you want to tweak the product, right? Rather than convening that whole exercise again, which at some point in time you can and should do, right? That's when you use this tool to query your personas and get a concept of how they would react without, and obviously the marginal cost of doing that after you've built it is very low.
Yeah. So if I'm a CEO and I have an immature AI strategy right now, which by the way is the vast majority of the businesses we've surveyed, but what's your advice on how to get started? Like, what's that first step the CEO should be taking?
Tim, you want to take that one?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. So from our perspective, first of all, agreeing to get started is the good first step, right? Doing nothing, as we said at the beginning, was not a good way to go. From an Ironside perspective, I think that really it's about business use cases and prioritization. From our standpoint, in that we've been implementing machine learning AI for a long period of time. Initially, it was buy a technology for a lot of money, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, hire a bunch of data scientists and send them off to go solve a problem. And that was effective in some situations and in some large companies. But as we look at growth companies and we look at sort of the ways that investments are made and ROI is expected, we put together a methodology that I'll sort of share the steps here, where we really focus on use case prioritization. So we have conversations, we have interviews with business stakeholders, we understand what's important for the business. We also at the same time understand sort of the data assets and the data elements that are necessary to feed those types of use cases, right? So it's an evaluation of where the opportunity lies, and then secondly, sort of what data exists in the business, what we call first-party data, and we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. And ultimately, so that use case prioritization, moving into platform rationalization, which is thinking about sort of what types of tools and technologies are available in the market. And as Paul mentioned, with billions of dollars being invested, large technology vendors like Amazon and IBM and Microsoft are just funneling a lot of money. So this is moving really fast, right? There's a lot of evolution, there's a lot of automation, there's a lot of things that make this easier to adopt and step through. The next step that we typically recommend is a proof of concept, and it's basically picking the most effective use case, and we'll talk about how we do that in a second. Really thinking about taking your data, taking the use case, and sort of just doing a quick and dirty, what we call an RVA, which is a rapid value assessment, to determine if you actually have the information to produce or predict or affect the outcome that you'd like to. And from our standpoint, right, this is the way we think about it. And each step along the way, you evaluate, does it make sense to move to the next step, right? Do we have the data to support the use case? And if you don't, then you stop, and then you go back and you say, okay, what's the second use case? And then we go take small steps to do that, right? So the intention and the thought process here is to really incubate the process to make, sort of modest investments, 20, 30, 40K, not 500K, $1 million, right? Before you can prove that you can get an outcome from it. And then once you've proven that the data supports the outcome and you have the data, and in some cases, and we'll talk a little more about this, taking third-party data and bringing it in against your first-party data. So if you have customer data, you may have an address for that customer. You may not know, sort of what their socioeconomic status is. And again, this is in a retail setting versus a B2C setting. There's third-party data that we can bring in and combine with your first-party data so that you have a better view of that customer, and you can then make a better prediction, right? There are other third-party data sets around, geographies, drive times, crime, weather, all kinds of different things. You get into marketing, you get into like DMAs and sort of very, very finite grain of information. But all of this third-party data combined with everything you know about the customer and everything you know about, sort of an ideal customer or a typical customer allows you to be more effective. And again, that's in a situation where you're in B2C. In a B2B situation, the metrics and the things that you look at might be different, but the concepts and the process is all the same. So from our standpoint, if you get through that RVA and you really and we've proven that, or we've collectively proven together that the outcome is effective and likely to provide significant ROI, then you move into productionization and moving it into production and then operate it, monitor and maintain, right? So one of the things when you're building these solutions is, one, they're learning, but they also sometimes need to be tuned and tweaked, and you might have new data sets that are brought in. I'll sort of take a step here and go to the next slide. When we think about use case prioritization, again, the steps of engaging business and technical stakeholders, understanding use cases, understanding the data viability, and we'll talk about the data in a little bit, but prioritize and down select use cases. And really what we think about in a machine learning AI use case is what is the impact on the business? So that's the business viability. So how important is this to the business? And then on the left side is what is the data completeness, right? So things that have high data availability and high data cleanliness and high business viability, that's likely where you're going to focus on your priorities, right? And in the case of generative AI, it's a little bit more specific around AI suitability. Is the problem that you're trying to solve appropriately solved with generative AI use cases, or I'm sorry, generative AI technology?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm assuming, are you finding with clients one of the toughest things to do is to, what do you want to say no to at the outset?
Yeah, I think from that standpoint, the evaluation of that often comes from a dialogue with the clients around the state of the data, sort of the complexity of the problem, right? Again, you know, we don't want someone to run a marathon if they've never, you know, walked around the block, right? You have to take small steps. You have to, and Paul mentioned this, right? There are a lot of personal productivity capabilities that exist within ChatGPT and tools like Grammarly, and those are steps of using AI to make yourself personally more productive. When you think about enterprise use cases, you think about affecting change in your business that, you know, could have major impact. It could be, you know, a decrease in your HR people or your customer service, you know, headcount, and that's really where the efficiency comes from, is having less people to do more things, right? So evaluating where to apply is something that we do quite often. I know that CEO Coaching has been working on an advisory and a sort of an AI roadmap kind of offering. From our standpoint, all of the things we're talking about here is the why. Why should you do AI? And from an implementation perspective, and we're happy to talk with anyone, but it's ultimately about the how. What are the steps that we need to take to actually do this? It's easy to sit and talk and show charts and whiteboards, but it's really about rolling up your sleeves and getting into the realities of your business, getting into the state of the data in your business, and the potential opportunities that come from those things.
Yeah, good. Let's make it even more real. Can you maybe give us a case study or two, maybe from clients that you have where those businesses are leveraging AI and what the impact those applications have had on their businesses?
Yeah, I'll take that one, John. I'm going to give you two examples because I think one is very generalizable to everybody, and the other one is illustrative of sort of real productivity improvement that can apply, again, to any business, but in your own unique way, as I mentioned, your special sauce. So the first one, we work with a medical device manufacturer whose business is kind of a razor blade and razor business. They sell a machine that has a lot of disposable items associated with the use of that machine, a respiratory machine. And their issue was, how do they, it was like any business, how do we find our best prospects? And how do we convert those into customers? And how do we convert our customers into our best customers, particularly in a B2B application where this is a customer that is an ongoing reusable a customer using the disposable items of their business. Their highest margin came in those disposable items. Their question was, we have customers that are using a lot of disposables and some are not. Why is that? But generically, it's this notion of how do I find the best prospect? So what machine learning is able to do is to take information on their existing clients and look at all the transaction histories, look at factors like relationships with the deployed sales force, with information about what they acquired in their transactions in terms of groups of products, but also to incorporate some of this external data that Tim was referencing. Give us information about the hospital systems that they're part of, what are their growth rates, how many beds do they have in different departments. All of that is publicly available information. And combining all of that structured data to understand why certain customers, or what are the characteristics of those customers that are the high turners, high users of disposable products. So that was extremely beneficial in segmenting their customer base and being able to understand the whys of the high turners. So then the question became, what customers that are not the high turners that I have, and now that I know what makes a high turners, what are the applicable actions I can take to turn them into high turners? And then further, we took that information and said, well, what data do we have on prospects? There's publicly available information on hospital systems, and that are not yet our customers, not yet transacting with us, and what characteristics might they have that most align with our high turn customers. And the output of that was not a massive application. It was literally a propensity score and a spreadsheet of those prospects and of those customers, right? So that's an application of AI around fueling your growth that uses that structured data that only you have about your customers, combines external data, and gives you a great answer, right? So, and that's applicable to almost any business. The second case I'll give you is very different. It's very process related. It's about a company's special sauce, and it's about that company's EBITDA. So this is a client of ours that is a South American shipping company, seafaring shipping company. Each of the containers that they ship has something called a bill of lading that can be worth thousands and thousands of dollars, as you might imagine, in a shipping container. And each of those clients has a different contract that may be negotiated on how they price with that particular client. So in order to manage that, the client paid an outside firm to audit every one of their bills of lading over a certain level against the contract. Well, you can imagine if you have the results of that data, results of what's in the contract, what's in the bill of lading, what the auditor discovered over time, you can see trends in that data about which bills of lading pass 99% of the time with 95% confidence. And then you don't have to actually have those audited. You can say those we can spare, right? So that's a use case that we worked with that client, and it dramatically reduced the cost that they were spending on this external party to do this auditing, right? So very much embedded in a process, but something that leveraged data to and then automated it back into the process so that that work didn't have to be done. So those are just two examples, John. Are those good examples of what you're looking for?
Terrific. Just, I mean, maybe a basic question attaching to that. How complex was that to build? How long would it take to build either the healthcare prospecting or the South American shipping, EBITDA? How long would it take to build something like that?
Well, if the diagram that Tim showed about the stages that we go through, each kind of takes its own amount of time, but those in each of those cases, we did produce a portfolio of use cases for those clients, up to about 10 to a dozen use cases, and those were the ones that were chosen to work on immediately. So that phase of casting that wide net can take anywhere. At one level, it can be done in a workshop, so call it one day, to really being able to investigate the use cases in about 3 weeks, including investigating the data. If you looked at that matrix, it was very important that there was a data axis as well as a business axis, right? So you can brainstorm them quickly, but to fill out that matrix takes, and to do it properly takes a good kind of 3 weeks doing economic analysis and doing data analysis. So, and from then the build, then we POC that to make sure that there's what we call signal in the data. So one thing I understand, everybody, about data science, and the reason you need that portfolio of use cases is that it is entirely possible that one of your use cases will fail. And it's not because you've done anything wrong, or us or some other partner you're working with has done something wrong. It's because your data does not produce the results that you want. The historical relationships are not in the data. That's why we have in that chart that Tim showed the stoplights, right? You have to figure those things out in a sequence so you fail fast, fail cheap, if that's the case. Failure rates don't have to be high, but they're going to be there, and you want to know it sooner rather than later, right? Yeah, in that chart, Tim, right? So then that signal analysis phase, again, might take another week or two, depending on the data in the use case. And then the build, unfortunately, John, the answer that all consultants have is it depends. And the reason that's the case is because, as an example, the customer example I gave for our medical device manufacturing client took a very short period of time once we got all of that data available, including the external data. Right? What we were producing from that were literally a set of spreadsheets that had propensity scores for prospects and customers. So that was done in probably 6 weeks. For our shipping client, that took longer because there were more forms of data coming out of their ERP system. That probably took about 8 weeks for that one. Okay, maybe a bit longer than 8 weeks. So. But that's the kind of time frame we're talking about. We're not talking about years or multiple months.
Yeah. And that's helpful, because I was trying to understand maybe order of magnitude, how complex, difficult and how quick some of that could happen. One other question before we dig a little bit more on data and its importance. Ironside has built some pretty cool applications around generative BI. Can you explain what that is and describe what you've built?
Yeah, this is a very interesting application of generative AI, a very unique one. You know, we as a data and analytics firm actually cut our teeth 25 years ago on BI, business intelligence systems, all of the dashboards. At the time reporting, today dashboards, interactive dashboards that people use to manage their businesses. We are an advanced tier partner of AWS. We've been working with, not for this to be an AWS commercial, but you know, in generative AI, they have a very interesting technology related to their dashboarding capability, which in their case is called QuickSight. Same thing as a Power BI or MicroStrategy or Tableau that are created by other providers. AWS has one called QuickSight, but they've taken their generative AI capability and applied it into that data domain, and it does something very interesting. And we built this for clients, and that is that it does two things. So imagine you've got your dashboards, and you're looking at, and you're able to plan out what kind of typical metrics you want to see in a dashboard. That's why you build a dashboard. But as you're looking at it, you may say, well, I have this deeper question I want to ask now that I see this trend. What generative BI allows you to do is ask that question literally audibly or typing it through an interface with natural language for that additional information. So you might say, show me all of the sales in Q1 for the top 3 SKUs in my California stores. And it will produce a graphic that shows you for that, even if that wasn't your preordained dashboard that you had created. That's the first thing it does, right? You have that ability to do sort of ad hoc natural language querying of your data. The second thing it does is it uses generative AI, again, to create a narrative for that data. So you've now allocated a whole set of data into different windows in your dashboard. You can point to certain of those windows and say, tell me the story of what's happening with this data, and it will write you a paragraph, just as if you're playing with ChatGPT. Very similar, it will just write you a paragraph about what that data is telling you. And it seems to do that reasonably well, in that it focuses on outliers, it focuses on means and variances and things of that nature, but all with English language. So if you want to be really lazy and have to give your boss a report on data, but you don't want to write it yourself, it will write it for you. So we would never advocate, of course, not having the human being in the executive study that data, as I'm sure no one on the call would. But that's what generative BI does. It's a very, very powerful capability.
Yeah, very, very good. Can I take a step back on data really quickly, because it comes up over and over again with our clients. And maybe just a basic question, maybe it's a simplistic one, but what is considered data, and why is data important to AI?
Paul, I'll take that. So data is the fuel for AI, right? Data is the fuel that provides you the corpus of information to deliver an outcome, to answer a question, to create some type of generative AI, marketing content, blog content, anything of that nature, right? So unfortunately, as I think Paul mentioned, the large language models that have been built and deployed and made available for everyone's use via things like ChatGPT essentially encompass the corpus of data that is available on the internet and in the library and in anything that it can get its hands on, and oftentimes things that it probably shouldn't have gotten its hands on, right? And there's a lot of sort of legal challenges that go along with that, right? Certainly within the context of an enterprise, data is anything that comes from, I have a little slide here of any of these systems, right? Adobe, Google, Slack, Microsoft, Zoom, payroll, Salesforce, Workday, GoToWebinar, anything that is an enterprise application, whether it's a SaaS application, an on-prem application. There are really generally two types of data. There is structured data, and structured data is typically stored in spreadsheets or databases or data lakes or data marts or data warehouses or anything of that nature. Also in any types of transactional and SaaS applications like I've spoken about. And then there's what's called unstructured data. And unstructured data is documents, audio files, pictures, images, sort of engineering diagrams. So there's so much unstructured data that's available and important to the enterprise. And machine learning had some sentiment analysis that came from text analytics, and there were certain specific use cases. But generative AI's ability, and I know that you guys have discussed some of the potential use cases of image generation and creativity, and things that are maybe a little bit more either creative or focused on entertainment. In general, for us, it's more solving business problems and leveraging the use and organization of structured and unstructured data to either inform or affect an outcome in that business, whether it's preventing someone from churn. So we talked about earlier customer churn. Hey, these customers are likely to churn. And then the next question is, what are you going to do about it? And what specific actions do you take to actually change the math of whether that person is going to leave, right? And that's really where this becomes actionable within a business, right? So knowing what's going to happen is important, but affecting it and changing it is actually even more important when you think about the profitability and the efficiency and the customer service or sort of the customer benefit that might come out of it. So anything that is data, your email, text. I mean, again, I won't repeat all that stuff, but anything that exists in these systems, and for us, data strategy, and maybe we'll talk about that, is sort of how do you control and organize and harmonize those things. But I'll stop there, John. And
let me ask you about that, because there's that quote by the founder of Google Brain, where data is the new oil, right? And there's obviously a lot of information out there talking about how companies with a clear data strategy have a much higher return on their AI investments. But it also feels like having a data strategy is a luxury in some businesses. What are the best questions a CEO can be asking his or her team around data strategy, or where do you start to think about how do you build a data strategy when you don't have one?
Yeah, that's a really great question, John. And so I think that a data strategy can be as simple as understanding where all of your data is. And we still have this up on the slide here with all these different individual source systems that contain data in your business. My guess is you have, I'm hoping you don't have all of them, but you have many of these in your business, and many of them have reporting and analytics. Many of them even purport to have AI capability, right? And that's interesting. And those productivity tools, you think about Salesforce. There's AI to predict who's your best customer, what might be what's the propensity to buy, or what's the available budget, or what did they buy last year and what should they be buying this year, but that's in the context of really just the sale. So when you think about data strategy, it's really important to understand how you can combine these things together, and maybe why you should combine these things together. I think Ironside as a firm, we grew up in the Fortune 500, Global 1000, helping sort of organizations combine and consolidate data. When you think about acquisition, a company that grew by acquisition, they might have 5 purchasing systems. They might have 5, sort of quality systems, or 5 ERP or 5 HR systems, or maybe they'll have 100 HR systems, right? And the ability to combine all that data together, harmonize it, and make your ability. I mean, even getting, for a large sort of defense contractor that we worked for, even just getting a headcount report was difficult because there were 17 different HR systems, right? So we needed to architect something that brought that stuff together, right? And that methodology and that experience really comes to bear in the context of dealing with all of the systems that everyone has today that are easy to acquire and easy to implement and easy to use. Really where, so I'm going to share sort of, again, this is a little bit of an eye chart, and I apologize for that, but sort of the sources that we talked about are on the left, right? CRM, ERP, point of sale, e-commerce, warehouse management, HR, et cetera. And then all of your unstructured data that may exist in SharePoint or Google Drive or Box or Dropbox or something of that nature, right? And all of this stuff is the fuel and the oil, right? You know, that people have mentioned. And also earlier we talked about external sources, demographic, geolocation, GIS, economic, weather, device data, right? There's so much information that can be either acquired or you know, sort of even just paid attention to. In a lot of cases, they may not be. You may have them in your business, but you're not paying attention to them. You're not thinking about them as an enterprise asset. From our standpoint, the strategy is around how do I integrate? How do I take things from those individual point source systems that are often siloed in the sense that I can't get, you know, I can do it in Excel. I can take data out of Salesforce. I can take data out of my, you know, QuickBooks or NetSuite or Sage accounting system, and I can put them together on a spreadsheet, but that requires a person, it requires effort, it requires, it also has the potential for error, you know, which is another thing when someone's manually doing something versus a technology or a computer, right? So the integration pieces, then you build a data asset. You've heard terms like data lake, data warehouse, data mart. You know, that's a way, you know, to kind of consolidate things together. And you know, the example I gave you of 17 HR systems, you're going to build a data mart to have one view of your HR system, even if the transactional activity happens in 17 different systems. And then once you start to bring those things together, and the nice thing is with the advent of cloud and with the advent of sort of a concept of data virtualization, you can bring data in and not spend a lot of organizational time moving it around. Just by putting it in and co-locating on a single place, like an AWS or an Azure or a Google infrastructure, you now have one place to go to get that information. You have one place to point your AI. You have one place to learn from, you know, sort of the information in a generative AI use case that you might want to, right? So taking baby steps along this path and thinking about this then allow you to really take advantage of you know, sort of the benefits of both descriptive analytics. If I have all this together, I can build a dashboard that consolidates the view across my entities or my different 17 different, you know, divisions within a business. But it also then unlocks and makes it available for all of the use cases and the data work that we've talked about earlier when you think about AI. And then on the front end of it, you know, visualization, descriptions, et cetera, talking about algorithms, applications, deploying it in or via a website, and then even data monetization, right? There are some scenarios that we've come across, especially in like financial services and credit card processing, where the data that you have and the data that you're able to create is actually a product that you're then able to sell to someone else, right? So it may just be something that it's a byproduct of your business, but then it becomes an asset that someone else is willing, or a product that someone else is willing to pay for. So it's thinking about data monetization, whether it's in the industry or maybe somebody else that's outside of that, right? So again, this is the benefit of the data strategy. Do you need to do a data strategy to experiment with an AI use case? No. You can take an AI use case, you can take data manually out of your CRM or out of your ERP and approach it. It's just going to be limited to what you're pointing it at. And there's going to be more work to bring those things together, right? So this is all about data maturity and organizing and understanding. We look at it and talk with our technology partners, and they view the lack of organization of data as one of the biggest impediments to success in leveraging AI. And again, from their standpoint, they want their customers to be successful. And this is something that, you know, many folks haven't invested in and haven't prepared for. And from our standpoint, you know, we've been building, you know, data marts, lakes, warehouses, both on-prem and in the cloud for almost our whole existence. So it's pretty natural to us, but we also recognize that, you know, it does require an investment. It requires a change in culture, as Paul suggested.
You know, given that kind of depth of experience you all have with a lot of clients who have been wrestling with how do they manage all those sources of data, and like this slide kind of implies, how do you kind of get that into something actionable? But have you found any kind of myths around data that CEOs should know, common misconceptions, especially as it maybe relates to AI?
So from my standpoint, one question that's often been asked of me is, if my data is a mess, can I leverage AI? And the answer is yes. I think what you're going to find is that as you start to leverage AI, you'll start to understand the challenges with your data. So you can, the benefit that you get won't be as valuable, right? So investing in curating, governing, harmonizing, and combining your data is going to make your AI investments more effective. I do think that there's also some myths around data security, right? So as I mentioned before, that there are some well-documented examples of data from one large electronics company that comes to mind that became part of a global LLM, despite the companies not understanding. There's been a lot of advances around the security of data in the cloud. There's been a lot of advancements in the maturity of generative AI. So you have the LLMs, and then you have a concept called RAG, which is retrieval augmented generation. And really what that allows you to do, I'm not going to get into the depths of it, but it allows you to take your data and combine it with the world's data, with an OpenAI LLM or a Anthropic LLM, and then get the benefit of the two things together, while all at the same time keeping your data sectioned off and not contributed to that LLM, right? So one myth is if I use an LLM, the world is going to know my data. That's a myth that is not. I think if you approach it and you don't have an understanding, you could very easily. So if you put your company business plan into the free version of ChatGPT, I personally wouldn't expect that to be confidential. At the same time, will they or won't they use it? I don't know. But getting into the paid versions and thinking about this in a way where you have someone helping you through the process, that's probably most important to. So that's the myth that I've heard that I wanted to dispel. But also you have to be careful at the same time.
But is the simplest mitigant for that, I just want to make sure we're clear for the audience, you can buy the paid version and that has protections, but the free version does not, if you're just talking about ChatGPT?
Yes.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, we're running short on time. Are there any last words of advice, either Paul or Tim, you all have for our audience today?
No, for advice, I would say, as we said, get started. I know previous speakers have talked about this. I know Raj did at the CEO Summit itself. That definitely get started on a personal level, playing with ChatGPT. Get the newest version, so anything you say is not leaked back out, and it actually is accessing the most recent data available on the internet. I wholeheartedly support that approach. Just recognize, as we've discussed today, the differences in the types of AI that you have, because the only bad outcome here is that you do something with generative AI and you believe you are now on the bleeding edge, and back to Peter Diamandis's quote, that you are now that company that is going to be on the winning side of AI versus your competitor who might not have adopted it. That's one of the challenges we see with generative AI, is that it sort of lulls you into complacency because it's so responsive and so good. Just recognize that that complicated picture that Tim showed about your data creates, if you looked at it closely at the bottom, it said a trusted source of data and a foundation for scalability. If you can solve that problem, all things that are currently available in AI and all of those billions of dollars that are being poured in that is causing AI to adapt over time, which it will do at a rapid pace, you've got the foundation around which you can leverage those technologies. So that would be my advice.
And Tim?
Yeah, to Paul's point, get started. Become conversant, learn, experiment. We're open for a conversation of, I don't know where to start, or I don't know sort of how to think about this in the context of my business, right? As consultants, we deal with many different types of businesses and have been in this world for quite a while, and understanding where you are and what opportunities you think you have, just a quick call with us. We're happy to do that complimentary, and that would be my recommendation is just get started, whether it's us or someone else. And engage your coach, right? Your coaches are ahead of the curve here. And again, I've had a coach personally for 13 years, and it's been fantastic. And I learn from him and he learns from me, right? So it's a fun back and forth. I'm sure if you are currently being coached, you'll, you probably feel the same way.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tim and Paul, for your terrific insights and your deep expertise that you've shared with us today. It's very clear and evident why so many of our clients and so many others go to you all for advice on both how to handle data strategy, but also as it relates to AI. So thank you for that. A reminder to all of you, if you enjoyed this conversation, or if you want to learn more about how to create your AI vision, your strategy, your roadmap, feel free to use the link in the chat to speak with one of our coaches, as Tim referenced. Also a reminder, all of our webcasts are available at ceocoaching.ai. So feel free to check them out for more information as well. Thank you so much for your time. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, thanks, John. Thanks, everyone, for listening to us. We appreciate it. And again, my email is in the chat, so feel free to reach out. Happy to talk further.
Thanks, Conley.